morning, sir.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning, sir.
Yeah.
Okay. Welcome to all of you once again, and please switch off your microphones. Please mute it. Okay, so that you can continue the class. So, dear learners, today we shall be discussing the latter part of Book One, that is Chaucer, Geoffrey Chaucer, and Edmund Spenser. So, before we start the class, so I would like to give you a very rough idea, brief idea on different ages of English literature. That so far as the English literature is concerned, we have certain ages like Old English period, Middle English period, Renaissance, Classical period, Romantic period, Victorian period, the Edwardian period, Georgian period, Modern period, Postmodern period. So one by one, we shall be covering all those periods while we shall go to our different books. So today, let me inform you, let me apprise you that at the outset, we have in last class we have discussed some points on the old ages, what we call the Anglo-Saxon period of English literature, and that period is within 450 AD to 1066 AD. 450 AD to 1066 AD. So that is Old English period, or what we call Anglo-Saxon period. But later then, we shall find from 1066 to 1500. Again, I am repeating, 1066 to 1500, 1500, that period, almost 500, that we call Middle English period. And in this Middle English period, we can find Chaucer as the beginner of English literature. So today I am discussing the second half of Book One that deals with Chaucer. The full name is Geoffrey Chaucer. So as I told you in my previous class, that when we discuss a poet of any period, then it is very much essential for us to know about the historical background of the age, the biographical account of the poet, and then we shall come to the points or the explication of the points. In that series, so let me come to Geoffrey Chaucer. If you have the study material, then you can see in the book one. Let me refer to book one. Your page number is 62. So from 62 page, yesterday we discussed that technical part. So today we shall discuss that. Am I visible or not? Am I visible?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So that part. So when we discuss that Chaucer, the age of Chaucer, that comes in the Middle Age period, and in that Middle Age period, Chaucer comes from 1343. The birth date of Chaucer is 1343. It is a question. It is a question. It's not authentic, but still, according to some sources, the date of birth of Chaucer is 1343 and up to 1400. So we are in Middle English period. We are coming to the 14th century, which covers the poem of Chaucer. So in that respect, let me tell you that when you come to the yes, when you come to the Middle English period, then what was the historical background? Because that is very much essential for us to understand the historical background. In that part, okay, let me give you some points which will cover the historical background. That during Chaucer's time, before Chaucer's time, in the Old English period, what we call Anglo-Saxon period, literature was primarily based on religious writings related to church, related to Roman Catholic practices, and all those things. So the most extensive writing was conducted on the subject associated with religion, and religion means Roman Catholic activities of the people. The first point. The second point, the second important point is that During the period of Chaucer, England had constantly been engaged with war with France. That is popularly known as Hundred-Year War. So that Hundred-Year War with France came to an end during Chaucer's time. So learners, that when a nation is engaged in war with any other nation, then the nationalistic spirit in the mind of the people is obviously higher than the normal time. Suppose now India is engaged in war with Pakistan, then our nationalistic spirit, our involvement for the nation will be obviously more, because that is natural. So similarly, the national spirit of the people of England or people of England, that was more because of the nation's engagement in the war with France, and that of course came to an end. And when the war ended, there was a major change that took place in the social structure of English society. What was that? That was the uprootation of the feudal culture. Feudal culture means what we can say in our normal language, the Jomidari system. What we say, feudal culture. So that landed Jamidars were there, landed feudals were there, and under them the farmers were there. We shall come on to that. So that feudal structure came to an end. So when it came to an end, obviously there was a growth of a new class in English society, what we call the middle class. We shall come to that. The third point is that most of the population of the English society, a major section of the English society, they were illiterate population. I mean, they were not educated or they were not literate. As a result of which, they did not have the direct access to the Bible or whatever was written in the scripture or in their religious books, because that was the only literature available to them. So in that situation, whatever was explained to them by the church authorities, let us say the popes or the clergymen, that was the image imprinted in their mind about the Bible, about God, about the Roman Catholic practices, and all that, because they did not know what is exactly written in the Bible. So, in a sense, they were sometimes wrongly interpreted by those people who were able to read, who were able to have the direct access to the Bible. So that is the third point. So obviously, in that kind of a situation, the literature that you find in the age of Geoffrey Chaucer, that was mainly based on religious devotion literature during Chaucer's period, mainly based on religious devotion, romances means imagination, and chivalry code of honor. Chivalry is a class of warriors, the knight, KNIGST knight. So literature was mainly associated with that. The subject matter was religion, romances, imagination, and chivalry code of honor. I mean, honor to the chivalric section or the knight section. So obviously, in this background, when you come to the other factors related to the age of Chaucer, then what else we find? That this was the continuity in the British society or in the English society till Chaucer. So when Chaucer came in the screen of English literature, then what exactly was the historical? What I gave you recently was the cultural background of English society. And in the cultural background, again, let me tell you that there were the society was divided into three states, ESTATES, state, three sections. And the three sections were knight, KNIGST knight, the nobleman. And the second section is ecclesiastic, the church-related people, people related to the religious practices. And the third one is the working man. That is called third state, people who are working for the other two sections. And there a hierarchy was being maintained. The knight were at the top, the ecclesiastic people were in the middle, and the working men were at the bottom. But because the clergymen or because the ecclesiastical people had an influence on the knight, so religion.
Sir, can you repeat the second class of society, sir, please?
ecclesiastic class. Ecclesiastic, the people related to religion. I mean, church. And church means in that period we have to remember that it was Roman Catholic activities, because by that time Protestant spirit had not come to English scenario. We shall come to that part in second part, the Protestant spirit. So three sections, the three estate society. Well, let me say you that English society was three estate society: knight or nobility, ecclesiastic or church related people, or religion related people, and working men, or what they were called the third estate. Okay, but in the practice of different activities of life, let it be economic, let it be political, let it be cultural, let it be social, let it be religious, whatever was told to them and whatever was practiced in the society, there was a big gap. I mean, there was a big gap between the ideal and actual practice of life. In theory, something else was there. In practice, something else was there. It was obvious, because when you find most of the population, they were ignorant, they were illiterate, then obviously you will exploit them, you will get the benefit of their illiteracy, you will get the benefit of their innocence and all that. So in that type of a cultural background, when Geoffrey Chaucer comes, then what kind of other activities we find in the growth of, because in a nutshell, let me tell you that Chaucer is considered as the father of English literature, because actually English literature, officially you can say, begins from Chaucer. So he is also regarded as the father of English literature. So it is very important to know the background from which Chaucer has come and what kind of a social background he faced during his time. That is very important to know. So let me tell you that in the historical background, again we can find that three states were there, and as I told you, the knight, the chivalry people, the ecclesiastic people, and they were associated with the aristocratic culture. But when you come to the third state, they were obviously, I mean, used by the other two classes of people. Number one point. Then we shall come to the another point, that during that period, there was a revival, there was a growth of trade and commerce, and due to the growth of trade and commerce, there was a growth in the London society. London, what I am discussing with you, that will find in your page number 62 to 67 of your book. 60 is not 67, 69 also. So up to 69, from 62 to 69, you can find all those things what I discuss with you right now. Okay. So the second point, as I told, that there was a growth of trade and commerce, and that led to the growth of London. So London was growing like anything. The third point was that historical factor during Chaucer's period was that there was a revival of alliterative verse for social and moral upset. It's very important that prior to Chaucer, literature was meant for only religious purpose. There was no question of secular aspect in literature. Secular aspect, non-religious aspect was not there not there before Chaucer. So Chaucer, for the first time, he found that there was a revival of alliterative verse for social and moral protest. The people had some awakening for to find literature not only for the purpose of religious activities, but literature should also reflect the society with its social, with its moral, and their effect. And the fourth point is that there was an emerging money economy characterized by the rise of middle class. Emerging money economy, because economy of English society before Chaucer or at the time of Chaucer, emerging of money economy. Prior to that, the economy was agrarian economy, agricultural based economy. So agricultural based economy gradually changed into money economy because obviously due to the growth of trade and commerce. When there was a growth of trade and commerce, then the economic structure, the economic design of English society changed from agrarian, agricultural based to money economy, because money was the only medium or the single medium for the transaction of different goods in the trade and commerce. Then the next point is that there was a what was happening during that period, just before Chaucer's period, that due to the feudal structure, there a lot of landed jamidars were there, or the feudal society was there, and most of the landed property belonged to a minor number of people, a very small number of people. They were the landlords, and many peasants or farmers were working in their field as the under the landlords, and their labor was enjoyed by the feudal people. So they were paid a little, and they were just managing somehow, and the fruit of their labor was enjoyed by the feudal section of the society. But when and most of the agricultural based economy was found in the villages, in the rural sector. But when there was the growth of trade and commerce in the English society, obviously those farmers who were remaining in a very poor economic condition, they got a chance to have a migration or have an exodus or migration or journey the from the village to the town, because they found better opportunity in the town, in the trade and commerce sector. So people are the laborers who were the field laborers or cultivation laborers. They migrated to town, and they left the job of farming to the craft, because they were engaged as skilled laborers by getting training in the urban sector. So what important thing we find here, that the agricultural based economy in the rural section of English society, in the village section of English society, that was changed into the money based economy, and the economy was controlled by the urban trade and commerce. So the economic shift, there was an economic shift or economic migration from agrarian rural society to industrial or trade and commerce urban society. So we find the exodus of the migration of the travel of the laborers from village to town. Okay, then another point we find here, there was a change that was emerging, but which is getting its more dynamism in the next page that we find in the second book of that is Edmund Spencer. That there was a transition or change from what? Change of awakening, change of awareness, change of intellectual growth taking place in the mind of the people, and what we call the spirit of Renaissance. Spirit of Renaissance, Renaissance, Renaissance. Renaissance means new awakening in all fields of society. So that Renaissance spirit that was emerging during Chaucer's period, and this spirit came from Italy. This came from Italy to England. So transition from the medieval culture to the Renaissance culture. And dear learners, let me tell you one more important thing that took place during the time of Chaucer's time, what is popularly known in history as Black Death. Now we all of us are facing the problem in that COVID-19 or Corona case. So how you see every day you find the people in America, in Italy, in France, people are dying in thousands of numbers. So history might record it, that one day they will find that there was a time when people all over the world, they were suffering from COVID-19, and a number of lives were gone. So similarly, during Chaucer's time, there was a term called Black Death. And Black Death means it was a death caused by plague. Might have heard the word plague. So the plague was a contagious disease that was created from that came from originated from rats. And it's because they didn't have any remedy against that, or vaccine against that, that during 1348 to 49, 1 year, about 1 year, the Black Death in England due to plague reduced 1/3 of English population. About 1/3 of English population was reduced due to the Black Death. So England was, and when there was a bubonic Black Death, bubonic plague and the reduction of population was taking place, England was suffering a great jolt in the field of labor, because most of the people who died in that plague, they were from obviously labor class, including upper class also, but mostly from. So obviously there was a shortage of labor in that. Then we find an important historical event that took place in English society, that was the Peasant Revolt that took place in 1381. Peasant Revolt. Peasant means farmer. So Peasant Revolt. So who are the peasant? The peasants were the workers, the farmers. They were not the landed farmers. They were the farmers working in the lands of the feudals. So these farmers who were working in the lands of the farmers, they, because of the war, 100 Years War, English society suffered a great economic loss. Because when a nation is constantly engaged in war, then obviously will find that economic problem will take place. So the English uh, let us say, not exactly government, so there a heavy taxation was imposed upon them. So they were as such poor. So when there was heavy levy was fixed upon them, and heavy taxation was laid upon them, they went for a revolution, and that revolution is Peasant Revolt that took place in 1381. So what happened in the Peasant Revolt? So obviously the government was bound to, the ruler was bound to abolish those taxation, and not only that, the farmers or the peasants who were the laborers in the field, by making a bond with their owners or the landlords, they were free from that, and they became the free men, and they became known as Reeb, R-E-E-B-E, Reeb. Reeb means a free man or a man having a small amount of land. I mean, he is the farmer of his own land. And peasant is a farmer who is having no land, but he is cultivating the field of the feudals. So peasant revolt has a great impact in in the society during Chaucer's time, that took place in 1381, and that was also a great influence in the writings of Chaucer. Because as I told you in my previous class, as I also today also I told you, that when you discuss any point, the historical background, the cultural background is very much important, because those are the factors which can influence a poet to produce his work of art. So in that category, we shall find Chaucer's period with this historical background. Then, am I audible to all of you, dear learners?
Yes, sir.
Yes,
Yes,
sir.
sir.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
So,
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
I will be asking you during after giving my lecture. You record it. Whatever doubt you have, you will ask me at the end. Okay. Okay. So let me now, what I am discussing, that is in your from page 62 to 69, you will find all those things. Then I am coming to the intellectual background. Intellectual background. So in the intellectual background, what I told you just now, that is the English society was controlled by the religious vision common to medieval culture. I am using two terms, that English society was intellectually controlled by, the intellectual section was controlled by a religious vision. I mean, there was a dominance of religious vision in almost every sphere of life, and that was common to the medieval culture, what we discussed as the feudal culture. So when Chaucer, what is the uniqueness of Chaucer? Why do we call him the father of literature or father of English literature? Because in the last class I told you that what exactly we mean by literature. That literature is the mode of expression of our thoughts and ideas. Our thoughts and ideas can be expressed in different modes. It can be a novel, it can be a poem, it can be a drama. So in that modes, poetry is also a form. I mean, a form of usually a form of literature. So when Chaucer adopted this form, poem, poetry. Why not drama? Because you know, drama was also an ancient form. Poetry is also an ancient form. But Chaucer opted for poetry because he wanted, because when you go for drama, then you need audience, and you need a stage, and you need actors. So there was a lot of things necessary to give justice to drama if you are writing it, and of course it is your personal choice. But what I'm trying to say here is that the intellectual background of Chaucer's time was primarily or predominantly controlled by a religious vision common to the medieval culture. So almost all the literature or whatever literary productions were there up to Chaucer's time, they were religion based. So Chaucer for the first time attempted something to write on the secular aspect of literature. I mean, non-religious presentation of English society. Because you know, literature is the mirror of society. So when you are reflecting the mirror, when you are reflecting the society in your art or in your poem or whatever you are writing, then it should be reflected truthfully. Now the important thing is what you are reflecting, whether you are reflecting the religion practiced by the people of the time, whether reflect. So till Chaucer, whatever was reflected in literature, that was mainly religion and religion. So Chaucer for the first time made literature a practice of non-religious activity or secular activity. But you see that when he wrote his poems or when he gave his poems to the society, he was also apprehensive of some punishment on him because nobody dared write literature in a secular mode. So he may be considered or he may be alleged as a sinner, S-I-N-N-E-R, sinner, papi. So Chaucer was very clever, intellectually very clever, that at the beginning of his poem, his major work, Prologue to Canterbury Tales, we shall discuss, that prologue, he very much praised to his audience or to his readers. And he also confesses at the very beginning of his poem that he is going to commit a sin because he is deviating the traditional path of religion and he is for the first time attempting to write a secular form of literature. So he is confessing his guilt and he is confessing his sin only because he is writing a poem which is non-religious. So you see what was the situation during Chaucer's time. You cannot write a secular literature, you cannot write a non-religious literature. But Chaucer did that, and that was a turning point in the medieval age to take literature in a realistic direction or in a social direction, and literature was truthfully considered as the mirror of society or reflection of society. Otherwise, it could reflect only the religious aspects and which was something different. So he confesses his guilt, he confesses his sin by writing a secular and courtly literature, and he also asks for forgiveness. He seeks pardon from the readers and indirectly from the authority for writing such a poem. And he was, of course, forgiven. So, and in the intellectual background, that is very important. That part is very important. And the third point in the intellectual background is, again, let me tell you that there was a displacement of Ptolemaic model of Earth by the Copernican universe. What was the Ptolemaic model? Ptolemaic model of Earth was geocentric. Geocentric means, according to Ptolemaic concept, the Greek philosopher Ptolemaic concept, Ptolemic, Ptolemaic concept, Earth is the center, Sun is revolving around the Earth. That was the concept, because there is no proof about that. So Ptolemy has given his view that Earth is the universe is geocentric. I mean, Earth is at the center, Sun is moving around it. But that concept was displaced with a new concept of a Copernican idea. Copernicus, you might have heard the name of Copernicus, astrologer. So, according to Copernicus, the system of universe was considered to be heliocentric. Heliocentric means Sun is at the center and Earth is moving around the Sun. What we also today consider as a truth. So there was a kind of there was a kind of new awakening taking place in all spheres of society. In the intellectual sphere, what do we find first? The religion was replaced with secular form of art or literature, displacement of Ptolemaic system or geocentric system by the Copernican system, heliocentric universe, and as a result of which we find the emphasis was given on astrology, medicine, philosophy, etc. So which were neglected, overlooked by the medieval people earlier due to the excessive influence of religion and in all sectors of life. We find here a new change is taking place. So in a nutshell, let me tell you that in the intellectual field, we find here the secularization of literature, secularization of literature or non-religious formation of literature. And it was this idea from where Chaucer got this idea, that this idea was imported from France. So this influence was a French influence in on English literature. So when the subject matter changed from religious to non-religious, then what was the new subject? The new subject in literature was courtly love. Courtly love tradition. It is a very important phrase to be used in Spenser and Chaucer. That is courtly love tradition. I mean, love became the element of literature. So, what is courtly love? The love of the knights, the aristocratic section of the society. Then, when again in this love, the concept of love, I shall discuss while I'll be taking Spenser, the concept of love, the courtly love. And if courtly love is there, then obviously we find here the literature deal with the element of chivalry, 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 the knight section, the noble section of the society. And obviously, when there are the warrior group of people, the ruling class of people, the noble class of people, adventure would be there because warfare would be there, court matters will be there, politics will be there, adventure will be there. These are the hallmarks of that intellectual background which influenced the literature during the time of Chaucer. And what are the hallmarks? The hallmarks were courtly love tradition, the royal courtesy, chivalric points, adventurous spirit, and adventurous spirit, and we find here the courtly elements. Then, uh, um, so far the technique is concerned, the what element they opted for literature, because you see, when a particular society or when a group of people are almost acquainted with only religion based materials, and all of a sudden you are imposing on them some subjects which are not very familiar to them, rather that is new to them, then you cannot explain everything directly. So you have to make it interesting, you have to make it convincing by using some literary techniques or literary weapons to do this. So the people, the writer, the poets during that period, or particularly Chaucer, he used the literary weapons like allegory, satire, romance, miracles, and morality as the distinctive technique of his literary craftsmanship. Let me repeat it. He used allegory. So, what is allegory? Allegory means description of something under the cover of another, under the veil of another. I mean, double meaning. So, we will be presenting something by using your art of literature, but that will have a parallel meaning which lies under this description. There will be an explicit meaning and there will be an implicit meaning. I mean, parallelly, two things will run together. Exterior and the exterior interpretation, it is describing a story or something, a love story or something like that. But the poet doesn't mean that. The poet has some internal design behind this story. So it is a double meaning description. So allegory. description of something under the cover of another. Your intention is different and your description is different. So you can understand that only when you have an intellectual access to that particular period, that what the poet is writing and what he is intending to say. Then the second feature, the second technique, as I told you, is satire. Satire. So what exactly is satire? If I say it plainly, if I say it very commonly, then satire can be criticism, to criticize someone. So let us take an example that if I criticize your makeup, or if I criticize your dress, or if I criticize your speech, then obviously you will feel hurt. So when I criticize you, when I criticize any of your features, then I injure your personality. Criticizing someone is a negative activities. If you criticize me, I will not like it. If I criticize you, obviously you will not like it. So satire is not like that. Satire is criticism of someone's follies and mistakes for the sake of amendment. If I am your good friend, I will criticize your mistake. I will point out your mistake, not to injure your personality, but to rectify you, but to amend you. I am your well-wisher. So you might have seen the cartoons in the newspaper or in the magazines. What is the purpose of the cartoonist? The purpose of the cartoonist is to present some faults in the form of sketch. You can understand the sketch only when you have the background knowledge that why the cartoonist has done this or sketched this. So satire means criticism of someone's follies or mistakes for the sake of amendment through humor. Humor, H-U-M-O-R, humor means fun. You will criticize someone not seriously, in a very humorous way, in a funny way, but it appears to be funny, but this has an undercurrent of seriousness. Because your purpose is not to derive pleasure, your purpose is to bring amendment or rectification in the character or in the event. So obviously, when you satire someone, you have to be allegorical. You have to be adjusting your literature, manipulating your literature in in an allegorical manner, in double sense manner. Some superfluous meaning and some implicit meaning. Explicit meaning, implicit meaning. Implicit meaning is very serious. Explicit meaning is funny or humorous. So Chaucer did that in his work of art. Then third element that technique is romance. R-O-M-A-N-C is romance. So let me tell you that we shall come across this word romance repeatedly while we shall discuss poem in different ages. So my dear learners, you must not misunderstand that romance in English literature is related to or associated with any element of love. We say he's romantic, so love, and it's not like that. Romance means here something non-real, imaginary, away from reality. So how much you are distancing yourself from reality, that is making you more and more romantic according to the interpretation of English literature. Because we shall come romantic age in our point. So at that time also I will discuss the word romance. So the simple thing is that romance means imaginary. So and then miracles and moralities. Miracles and moralities. So if in your MEG 2 also drama section, you will come across miracle and morality plays. So miracles and morality plays they are associated with some activities or practices of religion or church, but they primarily deal with the ethical code of conduct, the ethical code of conduct or moral code of conduct to be practiced in our human behavior in relation to religion. So that miracles and moralities are also the distinctive features of Chaucer. So, that come under the intellectual background of the age. One is allegory, then satire, then romance, then miracles, moralities, and one more thing is irony. The description sometimes is ironical. It is ironical. Okay. So what is that irony? So irony means the there is a difference between the intended meaning and the intended meaning and the descriptive meaning. I mean, there is a difference between what you speak or what you write and what you intend. Let me give a very small example of irony. Suppose you have a box of toffee. A small child has a box of toffee. So when you ask that small child to give me a box of one of the toffees from this box, then the child is reluctant. He is not willing to give a single toffee out of the box. Suppose you forcefully open the box and take one of the toffees from that box, and that child is throwing the entire box on the floor, entire toffee on the floor, and the child is saying, yeah, you mark the statement, what the child is saying, you take all the toffees. So the child is saying with anger, chalo tum sab kuch le jao, you take all the toffees. So what does the child want to say here? Does the child really want to say that you take all the toffees? No, not never. The child wants to say that return all my topics, including that one what you have taken. So the statement of the child is take all topics, but what he intends is give all my topics, return all my topics. So this statement, take all topics, is an irony in that particular situation. So irony means what you state, what you write, or what you speak is exactly opposite to what you intend or what you want to say. I think it is clear.
Sir,
Irony.
one second, please
Yes.
explain irony.
Yes.
So, one second,
Okay.
please explain about the irony.
Yes. I'm explaining it. Okay. So irony means there is a contrast, or there is a clear-cut difference, or clear-cut contrast or opposition, clear-cut opposition between what you speak or what you write and what you mean. I mean, what you mean is exactly opposite of what you are saying. If I say you, I love you, that means I hate you. So right now I gave you the example of the small child, that when you took one toffee out of the box, in spite of the reluctance of the child, then he threw all the toffees. And what he said to take all my toffees. But what was his intention? His intention is return all these toffees to me. So irony are different. We call irony of situation, dramatic irony, poetic irony. Irony can be found in poem, irony can be found in novel, irony can be found in drama, everywhere it can be found. So simply saying what is written or what is stated is exactly opposite of what you mean. That is irony. Irony means, again I'm repeating, there is an opposition or there is a contrast between what you speak and what you mean. What you speak, you mean the opposite. If you say you take it, that means you give it. So you cannot understand it only when you are finding it in a particular situation. Irony cannot be written with a single sentence. You have to have a situation, because a situation can create irony. It cannot be created automatically. So when we shall see that in the works of Chaucer, then suppose you take the example, we can take one example of his prologue to Canterbury Tales. So in that, I'll come over to the Canterbury Tales. So in that Canterbury Tales, he has taken some characters. So one of the characters is a monk. Monk, you know, he's a religious practitioner. So when that monk is introducing himself before his audience, and he says that I am a religious practitioner and I am associated with all religious works or all pious works, and at the same time he is telling about his practices, telling about his way of life, and it is very much found that what he tells is exactly opposite what he means, because he is not actually a religious practitioner. He is rather, in the name of religious practice, he is doing mischief or he is cheating the people. So he says that I am a religious practitioner, but he is not practicing the religious advices, the religious norms that what should be practiced by that person. So that is an irony of description made by Chaucer. There are exact sentences, exact lines in the poem, which can very much make you acquainted that it is an irony. So we shall come to that irony. So again,
Sir,
I'm
excuse
yes,
me, sir.
yes,
Sir, would you please give one example of allegory also?
allegory. Okay. So allegory means description of something under the veil of another. Description of something under the veil of another. So let me give you an example that I think there is a novel written by Jonathan Swift. The name of the novel is very popular. You might have heard the name. It is Gulliver's Travels.
Yes,
So
yes, sir.
yes, Gulliver's Travels. So Gulliver is a traveler in that novel. It is an imaginary work. So Gulliver is traveling to 4 different lands, and in the 4 different lands, he is coming over 4 different types of species. In one island, he is coming over Lilliputs, small creature, humanoids, human-like creatures, but their height is about 6 inches and like that. Very small human beings. And in another land, he's coming about Laputa. I mean, the giant-like structures, very giant structures. They are 20 feet tall and act like. In one of the lands, he's coming around the horses, what he calls hinims. So in all the 4 lands, he's coming across some creatures who are considered to be inferior to human beings. Because human being considers himself that I am the superior creature. But when Gulliver is traveling to all the 4 islands, he is finding that in concept or in morality, in ethics, in politics, in ideology, everything, what they practice, that is far better than what we practice in the English society. So instead of telling it directly, instead of criticizing the English society, Jonathan Swift is writing a novel, and when a small child will read the novel, he will enjoy it as a romance, as you enjoy that Harry Potter story. But no, Gulliver's Travel is not at all. It is meant for the children to enjoy it. It is meant for the adult to understand it. That it is a description of enjoyable story or a child story. But the serious meaning is that he criticizes the English society in the form of that Gulliver. This is allegory. Double meaning is there. It is plainly a very plain story for the children, but no. Jonathan Swift's intention is not to describe that plain story. His intention is to bring some seriousness for the rectification of the English society. So that is what is the allegorical presentation of the. So it is an allegorical novel. You might have heard another novel of George Orwell, that
Hello,
is Animal.
hello.
Yes, yes.
Hello, sir, I am audible. Hello.
Yes, audible.
Sir, namaskar, sir.
Namaskar.
Sir, please explain me what is the difference between satire and criticism.
Yes, satire and criticism. Okay, I have just told you that you see, criticize and criticism are different. Because you are students of English literature, criticism is something different. It is something literal. Because you have a criticism paper, tip paper, criticism. I'm talking about criticize. Criticism means a theory. It is theory in English literature. So I'm discussing the difference between to satirize and to criticize. Okay. So satirize means just criticize means you will criticize someone what you do not like, and you do not mind whether it will affect the mind of the person, whether it will put him or her in a sorry state, or whether it will cause injury to his or her personality. You don't mind. You just don't like, so you criticize. You don't have anything to that person. But when you satirize a person, then you are a well-wisher of that person. You satirize his or her follies or mistake only for the purpose, that positive purpose, that he or she will not repeat the mistake. So what is your purpose? Your purpose is to bring a correction or amendment or rectification in that character who is committing that mistake. So satire is a positive thing, and criticize is a negative thing. It is a negative behavior. Satire is a positive behavior. I satirize you because I am your well-wisher. I am your friend. I am somebody who is closely related to you, and I want that you will not repeat this mistake. But if I criticize you, that I don't mind, will repeat or will continue or will leave, I don't mind. Whether it will hurt you or not hurt you, I don't mind. I just don't like, so I criticize you. So criticize somebody means it is a negative aspect. Obviously, when you criticize someone, it will hurt him or her. But when you satirize someone, it may hurt. But it is having a noble purpose. Noble purpose of, I just gave you the example of the cartoon. When a cartoonist draws the cartoon, what is his purpose? A cartoonist is a social benefactor. Suppose Naveen Patnaik commits some mistake, our Honorable Chief Minister commits a mistake, then the cartoonist will present it in the form of a sketch on the very next on the paper, and you will find and you will understand that. But what is his intention? Let our Honorable Chief Minister not repeat this mistake, but because he wants the goodness of the society. But when someone does not like it and he just go on, suppose a man in opposition to that party, he go on criticizing, he doesn't mind anything to that. So criticize someone means negative, satirize someone is positive.
Thank you,
So,
sir. Thank you, sir.
okay. Now I'm coming to our, these are the intellectual background and historical background that I told you. Now I'm coming to Chaucer. Okay. So as I told you that Chaucer's life is from 1343 to 1400, 1343 to 1400. And the literary career of Chaucer, falls into three phases. Phase one is from 1370 to 80. 1370 to 80, first page. And during the first page, he has written some elegies. You will get it in your page number, I think you will get all these things in your page number 72 onwards. Okay. So in the first page, that is from 1370 to 80, he has written some elegies. The elegies are Book of Duchess, House of Thames. And what is an elegy? That elegy is a poem written on the death of someone. It is a poem written on the death of someone, and while someone mourns, when someone of our near and dear dies, then we mourn on the death. We express our sorrow on the death. But an elegy poem has certain characteristics. We shall come on to that later on. But simply I'm saying that Chaucer's literary career falls into three phases. The first page is from 1370 to 80, and during this first page he writes two poems, Book of Duchess and House of Fame. They are the elegy poems. Poem on the death of someone. The second phase is from 1380 to 80 to 86. In the second phase, he has written some allegorical poems. First is elegiac poems. The second page is allegorical poems, double meaning poems. They are Parliament of Fowls and Troilus and Cressida and Aristo.
Excuse me, sir.
Yes.
First page is?
First page is from 1370 to 80. Okay, and in the first page he wrote elegiac poems, the poem on the death of someone, the Book of Duchess, House of Fame. Okay, and in the second page, that is from 1380 to 1386. In that page, he wrote some allegorical poems, double meaning poems, and one is Parliament of Fowls, F-O-W-L-S, Fowls means birds, Parliament of Fowls, Troilus and Cressida and Aristo. And these poems are allegorical poems, and they are mainly on the elements of or on the themes of wedding or marriage. Okay, that and the courtly love and marriage and courtly love. But Shakespeare's masterpiece, Shakespeare's most important work for which we remember him, comes in the third page. That is, the third page is that is from 1387 to 1400, third page. And in that third page, we find the most famous work, that is Canterbury Tales. That is prologue to Canterbury Tales and Canterbury Tales. The Canterbury Tales is actually his masterpiece, and where you will find all those points what I discussed regarding the intellectual background, the cultural background, the religious background during Chaucer's time. Everything is there, particularly in the Canterbury Tales. So while Chaucer wrote that tale means stories. So Chaucer has a plan to write 120 tales. He had a plan to write 120 tales, but he could complete only 24. And in those 24 stories, 24 tales, he had presented it so nicely that all the intellectual, historical, and cultural background of English society of his time was very nicely or very truthfully focused. So why did he adopt this style? Because you see, when I talk about this Canterbury Tales, then let me say you that these are it is in the form of poetry, form of poem. So when the 24 tales are there, before 24 tales, there is a prologue, there is an introduction section, prologue. It is there in your book one also. So Chaucer was, if you go to the biography of Chaucer, that you very much find in his biography available in this book, that he primarily belongs to a shoemaker's family. But he had his education in France and in Italy. And during his education, there was the emergence of Renaissance taking place in English society, and he was very much influenced by Petrarch. I have told you in the previous class, Petrarch was the sonneteer. Petrarch and sonnet we were discussing in the previous class. So Petrarch and another Italian poet, Boccaccio. And Boccaccio has Boccaccio, B-O-C-C-I, Boccaccio. He had written a work of art that is Decameron. So Decameron, in some way, is considered to be the first novel in literature also. But so far as our poem is concerned, how has Boccaccio written Decameron? Decameron is not. Decameron is also a book which is a combination of a series of letters. One letter, then another letter, a series of letters. So similarly, what we call apostle, A-P-O-S-T-L-E, apostle. Apostle means a series of letter, through letter. So Chaucer adopted that formula, the Decameron formula. What is the Decameron formula? That you add episode after episode. I mean, literature became episodic. One story, it is linked with second story. Second story is linked with third story. So how can it link? It can link through the characters. So when he described the stories, he used those elements, what I told you, allegory, satire, humor, romance, miracle, moralities, irony, satire, everything was there. So this use of literary weapons, or these uses of the literary craftsmanship, was a direct influence of Boccaccio and Petrarch. And because he had his academic career in Italy and France, he was very much influenced by that. Now, as I told you that he was attempting to write a secular form of literature, deviating from the traditional form of religious literature, and he had confessed his sin that before the reader or before the audience that I'm going to write a secular form of literature. In that case, let me first tell you that what exactly was the aim or design of the Canterbury Tales. But in Canterbury Tales, what is happening here? That there is a group of people from England, English society, and the group of people, they are comprised one member from each group. Because as I told you, it was a feudal society, and there was a social hierarchical order. 3 estates were there. So Chaucer's group in Canterbury Tales was a representation of the miniature of English society of his time. I mean, he has originally planned for 120 stories, so he had selected 120 characters. But unfortunately, only 24 stories are told. But all the characters are there in the story. So, what is their plan? That all the characters are going on a pilgrimage to to Saint Thomas Becket's shrine at Canterbury Cathedral. There is a pilgrimage. So the pilgrims are chosen by Chaucer from all sections of English society, and they are on a pilgrimage to Saint Thomas Becket's shrine at Canterbury Cathedral. So on their way to Canterbury, they are taking rest in a inn, inn, pansala, what to say. They are taking rest in an inn, and when they are taking rest, they decided how to pass the time. So it was decided that each member of the group will tell a story and others will listen to it in turn, one by one. And he will tell the story from not from the imagination, but from the realistic account of the society related to which class or related to which section of society. So now the question comes that when there is a microscopic or a microcosm of English society retaining all the members of different sections of English hierarchy, then who will tell the story first? So Chaucer has very cleverly designed that the story will be told by initiated by that person who has got the deeper influence in the hierarchical order of the society. So obviously, when you go to your book, you'll find that the story is initiated by the knight, because knight, the noble class, is at the top of the hierarchical order of the society. So after the knight, we find the monk, the priest, then the clerk, then the franklin, then the cook, then the shipman, then the doctor, then the wife of Buck. In that way, the order is also the order is not random. The order is intentionally designed to show that it is the hierarchical order of the English society of Chaucer's time. Now, when Chaucer wrote this Canterbury Tales, then each member or each of the storyteller is telling the event of his or her society, and that is reflecting the English society of the time in a socio-political, religious, cultural truthfulness. That is why Chaucer was the first poet, Chaucer was the first man of literature in English to bring society in its real representation in the literary form. It is a secular mode of presenting literature. So that is why it's called the father of English literature. So in the general prologue of the tale, now again, if you look at that, because I don't have sufficient time to explain everything, just I am giving you some important points. That when Chaucer is making the general prologue, then you see that it is beginning in the spring season. Selection of the time is also very much intentional, because when he begins this journey in the spring season, because why the spring? Because spring in the English or in the European climatic situation, it is the return of mild weather after winter. Because in winter we find everything has gone into hibernation. So after that hibernation, we find there is a climatic situation of rejuvenation, and that spring is also the time of resurrection of Jesus Christ. So if you find Good Friday, resurrection of Jesus Christ. So when there is it is not only the resurrection of Jesus Christ, It is a resurrection of the spiritual renewal, of a rejuvenation of life in the mind of the Christian people. So, what is the motive of the poet? The motive of the poet is of spiritual renewal. That how the spiritual renewal in the mind of the people is associated with the cycle of season and cycle of season is related to cycle of human life. So a new spirit, a new vigor, a new awakening, a new renewal, a new rejuvenation, and, and that is what is the spirit of Renasa that is reflected by selecting the time of spring. So what is happening here is that it is just a material occasion. Spring season is a material occasion, but this material occasion creates spiritual yearning in the mind of the pilgrims to go for a pilgrimage to Saint Cathedral. And Saint Cathedral has a different story. Saint Cathedral was, Saint Thomas was sacrificed, he was murdered, and after his murder, he was declared as a saint. So, how the sacrifice of the people, the sacrifice of Jesus Christ, sacrifice of Saint Thomas, that has become a spiritual yearning for the pilgrim, that is very much important for the point. And so what we find here is that Chaucer is taking some, because he knows very, very well that religion is the only aspect which can unite the people at one place in all ages. So he has very much selected the idea of pilgrimage. But he has very cleverly collected the people from all sections of society. And under that allegorical cover, he has very truthfully reflected the secular aspect of English society in the form of literature. And those pilgrims are telling stories one by one, and by using humor, by using irony, by using all that. That is where Chaucer is great. He is the beginner, he is the initiator, and he can be rightly called the father of English literature. So this is how Chaucer is important for us. Chaucer is the beginning so far as English poetry or even say English literature is concerned in all that respect. Now, the question comes that from the old age, Anglo-Saxon age, we have come to Middle English period. And in the Middle English period, we have Chaucer. Chaucer has made literature secular. Chaucer has made literature popular. Chaucer has made literature very much acceptable for one and all. And at the same time, why? What is the other contribution of Chaucer to English literature? That is very important. That prior to Chaucer, if you read the poem Canterbury Tales that is given in the book 1 at the end, you'll find he is using a different type of English. It is medieval English. But that English that we are using today is our modern English. So English has also got three different stages. So Old English, medieval English, and standard English, or modern English. Now, prior to Chaucer, the English that was used by the other poets, that was quite chaotic, because they were using English which was the influence of mostly being influenced by Latin, French, and Scandinavian words. But Chaucer used English in his poems, which was the language which was used by the common speech of the public of London of his time. That means he made English simple, because he used the English which was used by the common people of English society, particularly the people of London. And that language, that was not the language, that was the dialect, the East Midland dialect. The eastern part of London, the middle part of London, the dialect that we are using. You know, the dialect is a kind of language which does not have its own script. It takes the help. You can say Samalpuri in Odia. It is a dialect because it doesn't have its own script. It depends on Odia. Odia is a language. So similarly, when you go to East Midland dialect of England, those East Midland dialect was adopted by Chaucer and used by Chaucer in his prologue to Canterbury Tales. And that is where he English language became simple for the people to read and to understand. And that further grew into standard English, what we use today. So that standard English or modern English, what we use today. So Chaucer's contribution to English literature, and he can be called the father of English literature because he contributed the use of London speech of his time, that is East Midland dialect, to make it, which to grow it into standard English, what is used today in the name of modern English. This is Chaucer's contribution, and this is Chaucer's uniqueness, and this is about Chaucer. So actually, I have given some idea on Chaucer to you in a nutshell. You can go through your book and you will find most of the points that I told you. It is available to you about Chaucer and the contributors from page number 82 to 91. You will get it. So everything is there, and then you will go to your text and find it. So as you are running late because course is more and time is less, so I am jumping to book number 2, that is Edmund Spenser. After Chaucer, I am coming to Edmund Spenser. So at the beginning of my class today, I have told you that English literature has different periods, and we discussed Middle English period, in which comes Chaucer, and Middle English period is up to 1500. But after Middle English period, the next period is the Renaissance period. The Renaissance emerged during Chaucer's period, but it attained its maturity in the latter part, that is between 1500 to 1660. 1500 to 1660, it is Renaissance period. And Renaissance period has 4 subdivisions or four different phases. The first phase is Elizabethan age. Elizabethan age is from 1558 to 1603. The second phase is Jacobean age. Jacobean age is from 1603 to 1625. Then next comes Caroline age, Caroline, Caroline age, that is from 1625 to 1649. Then comes Commonwealth period or Puritan interim. Commonwealth period or Puritan interim, that is from 1649 to,
Sir?
yes.
Excuse me, sir.
Yes.
We will now see the block 2.
Yes, I am coming to block 2. I mean, I have just started block 2. I am coming to Renaissance.
Okay, sir.
Edmund Spenser.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
So Renaissance period has 4 phases. The first phase is from 1558 to 1603, that is Elizabethan age. The second is from 1603 to 1625, that is Jacobean age. The third is 1625 to 1649, that is Caroline age. And the fourth phase is 1649 to 1660, that is Commonwealth period or Puritan interim. So during this Renaissance period, we shall first discuss Edmund Spenser at the first phase, that is the Elizabethan age. It is obviously named after Queen Elizabeth. So when we talk about Edmund Spenser, that Edmund Spenser, as I told you, that Chaucer is called the father of English literature. Similarly, Edmund Spenser is also called the poet's poet. He is a poet's poet because he is a man with extraordinary genius, extraordinary intellectual capability or majestic quality of intellectual capability. So, so when you come to that period of Edmund Spenser, then we find that the most extensive writing was conducted on subject associated with religion, as we find in the page of Chaucer. But when you come to the period of Renaissance, the spirit of Renaissance has already come to England during Chaucer's period, and it was attending. Now, let me tell you, my dear learners, that what exactly we mean by Renaissance. Renaissance or new awakening. Renaissance means, very simply saying, it is a new awakening. Odia, if you say in Odia, Nava Jagarana, new awakening. So Renaissance is the new awakening in the fields of social, political, religious, and cultural forces. So Renasa, it is not a universal term, because Renasa or new awakening in all these fields, it took place in England at a certain time after it took place in Italy. When you talk about Renasa in India, the Renasa in India took place during Raja Ram Mohan's time. It is much later than English Renasa. So Renasa is not a universal term. Renasa is a subjective term. It is associated with a particular society, with a particular nation, and it falls at different times in different nations. So in that respect, we find during Edmund Spencer's time, we find the 16th century, first part of 16th century, or Elizabethan time, we find Renasa was attending its maturity or attending its full-fledged influence in English society. So, due to the spread, how this Renasa came to England, that is also essential for us to know, because we have to start Edmund Spencer. So, Renasa spreaded in England due to the new humanist learning and ideology. I'm repeating it. Renasa spreaded in England due to the new humanist learning and ideology. What is that humanist learning and ideology? So how it came and how did it work upon? That humanist learning came from Italy to England after the fall of Constantinople to the Turks in 1493. If you go to your book 2, you'll find that I am now discussing page number 10, 11, 12, 13. So in page number 10, it is very much there that Renassa came from Italy following the fall of Constantinople. Constantinople is a fort. Constantinople to the Turks by the attack of the Turks in 1493. So what happened after the fall of Constantinople? That the refugee from Constantinople, from that city, they came to England, bringing with them a vast learning and literature, especially the literature they had collected of the Greeks, and that was stored in their library of the city. So those books came to England from Italy after the fall of Constantinople by some of the humanists. Those humanists, and humanists know they are very much liberal because they treat the entire human being as one. So there is no question of feudalism, there is no question of social hierarchy and all that. So they had the new spirit to look at the humanity. So those humanists, Italian humanists who came to England due to the insecurity of their life and their property means their intellectual possessions, they were Savonarola, Ticino, and Pica della Mirandola. That is there in your book. You can find the names. The Italian humanists were Savonarola, Ticino, Pico della Mirandola. So when those humanists came to England, they influenced the English humanists. Any question? They influenced the English humanists, and the English humanists are Thomas Lincre, William Lilly, John Colet, Desiderius Erasmus. So in brief, the Italian humanists came to England by bringing those classics or books what they have collected, those Greek writings, to England. And when they came to England, by that time, the court language of England was French. And the intellectual language, the academic language was Latin, like our Sanskrit. So Latin was their academic language. So the language of the court was French, and the language of learning was Latin. So in that situation, Chaucer has already developed English language into a standard language to find its way, to find its path to carry on. But the problem was that when court language was French and the language of learning was Latin, then two poets, Yatt and Sorre, W-Y-A-T-T, Yatt and Sorre, S-U-R-R-E, Sorre, two English poets, what did they do? they helped the Italian humanists by translating the Greek, Latin, and Italian verses into English. So translation took place. So when translation took place, many a great classics of the Greek people, or many a great classics of the Latin or Italian verses that were translated into English, and because of the translation, the spread of Renaissance was very much easy in the English society. Now there was a problem in the translation that some people attempted to translate Bible. So when the translation of Bible took place, there was the popularization of the Bible, because prior to that, Bible was mostly available in Latin. So few people are able to read Latin, and the people who are able to read Latin and to explain it to the general public, that was sometimes misinterpreted. So the ordinary people were in dark to see what is exactly written in the Bible. So when that Bible, the New Testament, was translated to English by some poets, some translators like Wycliffe and William Tyndale, and subsequently King Henry VIII in 1535, then people had a direct access to read Bible and to find what is exactly written in the Bible and what had been told to them earlier by the other interpreters. And they found there were a lot of differences between what they are finding and what they had been told. As a result of which, you find there was a protest, and that protest was that is the new ecclesiastical practice was initiated in England. The earlier Roman Catholic practice, for the first time, faced challenged by the new section of people, that there was a movement against the practice of Roman Catholic Church, and the spirit of Protestantism came into, which was later on, which was in the latter phase led by Martin Luther and the Protestant group of people. So that Protestant spirit was an outcome of the spread of humanism and the spread of Renaissance in the English society and the translation of the Bible. So when people translated the Bible, or when there was a translation, then the people who were associated with Church, Roman Catholic Church, they were apprehensive that Roman Catholicism might lose its popularity. So they propagated that the Bible cannot be translated because it is written, it cannot be translated, and translating Bible was considered to be a heretic task. Heresy, you understand? Heresy, heresy means something going against religion. So people are afraid to translate the Bible, but when daringly two new translators, Wycliffe and William Tyndale, translated, and they were supported by a King Henry VIII, then because he was a king, he translated the New Testament of the Bible, what we call Henry's Bible. Today also we call it Henry's Bible, New Testament Bible. The church remained silent because they cannot go against a king who is translating it. Anyhow, the translation of the Bible was a new page to expedite the spirit of, let us say, that is Renaissance. And as a result of which, we find, in addition to that, one more important thing we find here, that the art. There was a major school of art which was influenced by that new learning, and they presented their paintings through the new type of art of the Renaissance spirit. And two of the important painters of that age, you might have heard their names. One is Michelangelo, and another is Leonardo da Vinci. You might have seen the portrait of Mona Lisa, which is very much famous till today. So those two painters, Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo, they painted their pictures with the new form of Renaissance impressions, Renaissance elements. So in art like painting, in art like literature, what happened? There was a new ecclesiastical practice with a moral vision of powerful Puritan imagination. Moral vision with new powerful Puritan imagination. The Protestant spirit for the first time came, and new humanist learning by St. Francis, John Wycliffe, etc., that propagated the Spenser's poetry. So Spenser's poetry, Edmund Spenser's poetry, that is typified by all these characteristics of this age, what we call the Renaissance age. Okay, then the Reformation. As a result of all these things, a new type of Reformation occurred in the English society, and it is officially recorded by the English people that 31st October 1517, 31st October 1517 has been recorded as the official date for the Reformation in English society. So these are some of the intellectual activities that took place during Spenser's time. So in addition to that, when you come to the social and political circumstances of the age, then I have already mentioned in my previous section of the Chaucer section that there was a shift of agrarian and feudal economy to the industrial-based economy. And there was also the repeated epidemic of plague that reduced the population. So as a result of these two things, the shifting of agrarian feudal economy and the growth of trade and commerce and industry, and industry means not the industry what we mean today, industry means the woolen industry, and repeated economic epidemic of plague and the reduction of the population. As a result of these two things, there was a shortage of labor. And the shortage of labor in the agrarian sector, agricultural sector, was a blessing to the peasants, because when there is a shortfall of labor, obviously their wages will be more, they will be more in demand. So these peasants who were working in the fields and they reduced into a very sizable number, then the demands increased. And these peasants, they were in high demand, and that is why the economic standard improved, and some of them, they migrated to town to work in the industries, to work in different sections of trade and commerce, as a result of which their economic standard grew. So what was their earlier class? They were poor class. But when the financial standard improved, then they were emerging into a new class, what we call the middle class. So middle class is an outcome of in that period of Spenser, the shifting of economic structure, economic style of the plague. So these landed farmers, the yeomen or the small farmers, they remain in the village, and the other farmers, they change themselves to be the skilled laborers, and they improve their standard of living from poor class to middle class. Then, what happened to the landed farmers? Most of their lands remained barren, remained uncultivated. So as a result of which, they also had to manage it. So they changed their cultivation, they converted their cultivation into sheep pasture, SHEEP, sheep, into sheep pasture due to lack of labor. And in the sheep pasturing or sheep cultivation, they enclosed a big area in the village, an abundant area in the villages, and they developed the pasture of sheep and had wool and formed woolen industries. So there was, due to this factor, there was a popularity of pastoral, and the popularity of pastoral, the sheep shearing or sheep cultivation, the pastoral element, and pastoral element became a genre or literary trend in literature. And that is why in the time of Edmund Spenser, you find that shepherd became a figure. Shepherd means the category of the sheep. So sheep shearing or shepherd became a figure, or pastoral setting in the poem became a literary genre, and it became the image of Renaissance poetry. So in Spenser's poetry, you find the image of shepherd culture in the poetry, and the growth of London as a commercial city with new classes, redistributed population, employment, and commercial gain. So the poem of Edmund Spenser, that is Sappho's Calendar. Sappho's Calendar is a very true reflection of this new form of pastoral genre in poetry. Now, I'm coming to the poetry of this period, the Spenser's period. The poetry within this period was most written by the courtiers. They were highly educated gentlemen. So poetry was written by the highly educated gentlemen. So poetry was meant for the highly educated people. So that was a rare publication. Publication was not there because it was meant for a small circle of friends and others of the similar noble rank. So who are the poets? The poets were patronized by the court, king's court. The poets are patronized by the noble class. So obviously, when I am a poet and I am patronized by somebody, then I write the poem about him because I have to satisfy. Is because I have to maintain my family. So I have to be. For the sponsorship or patronage, they wrote the poems in high, in kind of highly intellectual caliber. And so courtly love tradition was followed during just in page number 13 you will get all these things. The courtly love tradition was followed. The love in the love between the love in the people of the related to the court, the knight or the noble section, and poetry was projected as divine origin and advertising its civilizing effect. So this is the characteristics of Spenser's poetry. And in yesterday's class, I told you that Spenser was very much popular for his sonnet, Spenserian sonnet. So Spenser has written almost 89 sonnets he has written. So in 89 sonnets, someone was asking in my previous class, in 89 sonnets, he has they are called amorety sonnets. Amorety has come from the word amorous. Amorous means romantic, or what you call amorous means to become influenced, to be influenced with the emotion of love and romance. That is amorous. So amorety sonnets are love sonnets. So apart from that, we find that Chaucer's when we consider the works of Edmund Spenser, then the works are Faery Queen, written in the epic style. The work is Sappho's Calendar, Prothalamion, Epithalamion, and Amorety sonnets. They are very much based on courtly love tradition. So, as I was telling you that in my previous class, so far as the element of love is concerned, you can refer to page number 30 or 30 and 31, 32, 33, what I'm discussing right now. So Edmund Spenser, when he wrote his Faery Queen in the epic style, epic means like a Ramayana, Mahabharata, Iliad, Odyssey, etc. Epic style. There is the influence of the Greek poet Homer and his epic Iliad, or Virgil's Aeneid, or Ludovico Ariosto's Orlando Furioso. The three poets, epic poets, Greek poets, Homer, his epic Iliad, Virgil, his epic Aeneid, and Ludovico Ariosto, his Virgil's Orlando Furioso. These three epics had influenced him a lot to write his Faery Queen. Sappho's Calendar, as I told you, it was containing the pastoral genre, the sheep shearing culture. But two of his important poems I will focus right now is Prothalamion and Epithalamion. Thalamion means marriage or wedding. So Prothalamion means before wedding, Epithalamion means after wedding. So before marriage and after marriage. Now, in these two poems, in this wedding poem, nuptial song, you must say, nuptial song, wedding song, he has very tactfully and he presented his view on the concept of love. That what is according to Spenser love between a man and a woman. So he has very much emphasized on the institution of marriage. That he wrote the poem Prothalamion and Epithalamion, signifying on the point that which is completely antithetical to that of Shakespeare, because love, according to Edmund Spenser, that there should be a reconciliation of new Platonism and Italian Renaissance, spiritual love and earthly love. He is making a comparison and contrast between spiritual love and earthly love. The physical passion celebrated in an idealized and spiritualized fashion. That is, let me explain it in a very simple way. That Edmund Spencer does not certify love only as a mental activity or mental union or mental coagulation or mental adjustment or a mental understanding between a man and a woman. Love, what he says, the love is incomplete only when there is a physical union between a man and a woman. And the physical union between a man and a woman is certified, legitimized only after the function of marriage. There is no society in the world which certifies or recognizes the man-woman relationship. I mean, I'm talking about the physical relationship without the social approval through the institution of wedding or marriage. So by writing these 2 points, prothalamion and epithalamion, he is very, very clearly saying that when before the marriage, what is happening? Engagement. So prothalamion is a poem on engagement ceremony. So after the engagement, a girl and a boy, or let us say a man and a woman, they are mentally attached to each other. They think for each other, and they gradually develop their inclination. They gradually develop their, feeling. They gradually develop their emotional attachment for both of them, and that is love. But that is incomplete because they wait till the wedding. They wait till the marriage. So after the marriage is solemnized, what is happening? The marriage is solemnized as a social institution. Society approves them. Society certifies them, and they, after the marriage, they go to their marriage bed. They are physically united, and there, the function of love is attending its maturity or attending its completeness. Why? Because from that physical coagulation, they contribute the next generation. So procreation is a necessity for men and women, because unless there is procreation, unless there is the birth of a new generation, how can you run the society further on? So men and women love as a social responsibility. What is the social responsibility? They must contribute citizen to the society for its continuity. That is where marriage is a necessity, and the marriage, a love in that marriage is there. So in very simple way, I can say that epithalamion is the poem written on the concept of the legitimization of sex. In a very simple meaning, it is the legitimization of sex with religious, cultural, social approval for the necessity of the society. So my point is that Spencer's concept of love, courtly love, the love of the noble, courtly love, is a combination of both physical and mental association of men and women. So the physical passion of a man and a woman is celebrated in an idealized and spiritualized fashion through wedding. That is why wedding is very much important and it can be fun. But my dear learners, when you come to Shakespeare's sonnet or Shakespeare's poem, you won't find this concept of love, because Shakespeare concept is that, or the concept of the other part is that they emphasize on the platonic love. I mean, they do not give emphasis on the physical union of men and women. They give much more emphasis on the union between two hearts, two minds, two souls. They ignore the physical aspect. So this is the important part of the interpretation of love so far as Spencer is concerned. So I think it is a very much important part to understand. So when you go through your book, you will find in your page number 31, 32, 33 about the prothalamion, epithalamion, and all that if I am just reading some line in 31 page that epithalamion is carefully crafted yet exuberant song celebrated the poet's love for a for and marriage to Elizabeth Bull. It appears to have been written as the culmination to the courtship described and embodied in the Amoreti Sonnets. Like the Amoreti Sonnets, it too celebrates a legitimate form of sexual desire that between the bride and the groom, husband and wife, is very much written, and that is a deviation from the traditional concept of love. So I think I have given some of the points to you regarding Chaucer and Spenser. Now, dear learners, if you have any doubt, you can now give your vision and comment and ask me.
Sir,
Yes.
excuse me, sir.
Yes.
Shakespeare and Spenser,
no.
they are. Excuse me, sir.
Yes. Please.
Spenser and Shakespeare are from the same time period or sir from different time period?
Both are from Elizabethan period, but after Spenser, Shakespeare will come. And he's basically a dramatist, but he has written some love sonnets. And the difference between Shakespeare and Spenser is that the concept of love is a little bit different, as I explained it to you.
So there must be confusion among the people at that time.
No. It depends upon your own vision how you interpret, because man to man it differs. So that is the reason.
Yes,
Hello?
sir.
I think kindly explain us the comparison between epithalamion and prothalamion.
Comparison between prothalamion and epithalamion.
Okay.
Prothalamion is before wedding, epithalamion is after wedding. So when the love tradition is there, courtly love tradition is there, then before wedding, how the men and women who have not become the bride and bridegroom, they are anxiously waiting for their unification, and they are developing emotional inclination towards each other. And after the marriage is over, in the epithalamion, how they come to the culminating point of getting themselves both of themselves on the marriage bed or on the honeymoon bed, and they are attending the culminating point of their love, and they are actually according to Spenser, love is the concept of love is fulfilled, because that will lead to satiate its social responsibility of begetting next generation. That is the function of marriage. Because unless there is marriage, you cannot legitimize the man-woman relationship for their social responsibility. Because marriage is necessary as a social aspect. Because without marriage, someone begetting a child, it is not approved or accepted by any of the society. You can get it in your novels also. The same idea will be there.
Am I audible, sir? Hello?
Yes, audible.
Actually, intellectually, British society have used the Latin language for their study. So, may I know that, sir, this Latin language must be mingled with the literature of the in that type poet. Must
Yes.
be
Yes. There are many Latin words used by the poets in that time, but Chaucer has tried his level best to simplify it as possible as into the Midland dialect of the England people. So they have used some Latin words, but they have made it very simple by using the regular English language. Yes. Is that clear or not?
yes, sir, clear, sir.
Yes.
And here epithalamion and prothalamion, these are the two process of getting wedding. But this two process, how it reflects or how it reveals its properties in wedding song.
Wedding song, because when in this song, Edmund Spenser has taken the setting of the pastoral setting. As I told you, that when the ship shearing was becoming a very popular trade, Then the pastoral atmosphere. I mean, to keep the sheep in a secluded area in a I mean secluded area within a very confinement, and the shepherd is there to take care of them. So in that situation, I mean, it is a pastoral setting. The engagement ceremony is being solemnized, and in that wedding solemnized, the poet is taking the pastoral setting. The poet is taking mind of the he says them lover and beloved. It doesn't stamp them as man and woman or bride or bridegroom, because he says them lover and beloved, because they are in a position to extend their love for each other. So how they are mentally developing weakness towards each other, mentally getting emotionally attached towards each other. So that description is there in the prothalamian section. And and the marriage is in the epithalamian section, the marriage is solemnized, and after the marriage is solemnized, how their relationship is changing into emotional to passionate or physical, and how they are celebrating it, and they are culminating the relationship. That is described in that section. But the setting is always pastoral, because that was the design of the time.
Thank you, sir.
Sir, there's a question in the question for review that the Prothalamion by Spenser is a less wedding song and more a complaint by the poet. Do you agree? Respond the specific reference to the poet's political and personal life. Sir, in this question, it's written that less a wedding song and more a complaint by the poet.
Because you see that the poet is just celebrating the
Sir,
wedding
actually
song.
in Epithalamion, it's his own marriage, and it's in Prothalamion, it's about the daughters of Somrates.
Yes.
So that's why it's a less of wedding song, because his involvement was more in
Definitely.
Epithalamion.
In the yes, it is more in epithalamion, but here, what is the concept of love for Spenser? The concept of love is that unless you attend the physical passion, it is not considered to be complete. Okay, so that is why. Hello.
Hi, sir.
Please mute your microphones, and someone one by one you say, so that I'll be able to understand. I will be able to listen. It is creating disturbance. Okay. Any other doubt? Please say. Any other doubt? Hello.
Sir, it's also it's emblematical representation. The representation in both the poems are symbolic.
Yes, symbolic. Definitely symbolic.
Okay.
Symbolic.
So is it because of the mythology, Greek mythology involvement?
Yes. There is the influence of Greek mythology, because it is a Renaissance song. Okay.
Okay. So there are other questions also, and there's a thing like additional reading. Will any questions come from the additional reading section? Is like the Spenser's additional reading, which was mentioned in the last, like page number 35, additional reading. Is there any question possible questions come from this section?
Let me see. Page number 35, na?
Yes,
additional
sir.
reading. No, that is not necessary. No, that is not
necessary.
No,
the ones that are in the book, that are in the material, they will come.
Yes.
So we have to emphasize on that.
Whatever. Yes, emphasize on that.
Okay, thank you, sir.
That is for your. Okay, welcome.
Sir, you have introduced us yesterday that we have to buy English history of English literature by writing by an Indian writer. So please mention suggest some names, sir.
Indian writer, you can go to B. Prasad. One writer is there. Then Ramji Lal is there, and some Sen is there. B. Sen or M. Sen is there. These three are the Ramji Lal, B. Prasad, and S. Sen. Okay, these writers are, and other books also there. You can go to a bookstore and ask. They will show you a lot of different writers. But they are the traditional. Better if you go to B. Prasad. He has written a bit in a simple manner, so it will be accessible to you. If you are not a student of English literature, then B. Prasad will be a good one, I think, for you.
Okay.
Hello.
Yes.
Sir, am I audible?
Yes, audible. Yes,
Sir,
audible.
please again explain the procedure log, sir.
Which one?
Hello.
Which one?
Hello.
Yes, say.
Sir, please explain again the procedure log.
It is not audible what you are saying.
Yes, sir.
The background sound is too much. Please say only one can. Yes, now say.
Sir, please again explain the procedure poets or quote quality.
What's quality?
Courtier poet.
What is courtier poet? Okay. Courtier poet means the poets who were belonging to the court of the king. Okay. Court of the king. King's court. So from court it is courtier. So the courtier poets would write the poems mostly for the kings and the nobles. So they were obviously educated people. So their quality of poetry, the quality of language, the quality of theme was not for the ordinary people. So what they will write? They will write about the activities of the kings, queens, nobles, knights, chivalry, and all that, because they have to please them. The reason is very simple, because they were sponsored by them, they are patronized by them. If I pay you money and you don't have any other source and you are a poet, then you will obviously write the poems which will be satiating me or pleasing me, or which will make me happy, because I will pay you more and more. So the courtier poets were writing because that are the politics of the court. Now you see, when you find a poem written during the time of Akbar or Shahjahan, the poem will be obviously appreciating Akbar and Shahjahan because they were paying money to them. So similarly, the court poets were sponsored by the kings and queens or the nobles and the chivalries. So they were writing the poems regarding them, on the subject of them, and they were writing all the good qualities of those things. So it was the politics of the time. It was the court politics of the time, so that the record will be kept, and in the later course of time, they will be creating an impression in the mind of the people. They were great. Shahjahan has made so many things we are appreciating, but do you know that what are the bad things Shahjahan has done during his lifetime? You don't know that, because that is not recorded. Because the recorders who are doing it, they were sponsored by the king. Similarly, the court poets, the courtier poets, they were patronized by the kings, and they were writing the poems regarding the court people. And the poem was meant not for the general public, because there was no publication at that time. So it is meant for a small circle of friends, or small number of people of the noble rank, high class rank. So the poems are written in the aristocratic manner, in a high quality, meant for a very small number of people to read. So obviously they would write about the courtly love tradition that was followed. The courtly love, the love among the kings, queens, noblemen, knights, that were there. So Prothalamion is a poem that is following the courtly love tradition. But when you come to Epithalamion, it is poet's own marriage that he is writing. So Prothalamion is a poem of that tradition. So poetry was projected as divine origin and advertising civilizing effect. That was advertising, making an advertisement of the kings and queens to the people. Okay.
Sir, again, sir. Hello.
Hello. Yes,
Sir,
audible.
Please kindly explain what is the difference between Renaissance and Reformation.
Renaissance and Reformation. Okay. If you Reformation is a official word. Reformation is an official word. Reformation refers to, if you come to that record or official word, the date I gave you is the 31st October 1517. That word records that Reformation refers to the bloody and violent movements against the Roman Catholic Church. I mean Protestant spirit. So for the first time, the influence or the stronghold of Roman Catholic practice in the English society was challenged by a new spirit of Protestant spirit. And this Protestant spirit came to the mind of the people because of the influence of Renaissance. In a very simple language, Renassa is the new awakening, new sensibility created, came into the mind of the people due to the influence of Italy and all those humanists. The people came there due to the translation made by the poets, due to the books translated by the other poets. But as Reformation is the result of Renassa. That I'm saying.
Sir, that time when the Italy people from Italy and the humanists came, sir, that time conservatism also there. So how
Yes,
people
the
suddenly accept that and accept the new ideas by them?
It is not suddenly. It might have taken 20-30 years. Okay. It was not suddenly. It might have taken 20-30 years. Okay. Suddenly it cannot take place. So first fall of Constantinople. After the people came from Constantinople to England, they came with the books. The humanists, they influenced the humanists of England, then translation. Then in the process might have taken 20-30 years. And after that, the people might have gathered courage to raise a voice against the traditional practice of Roman Catholicism. So that Protestant spirit might have come to that against the traditional ecclesiastical practice after 20-25 years later, not immediately, obviously. Okay. Anybody? Any other?
Sir, there are 24 stanzas in the Epithalamion. Sir, the exorts can come from any stanzas, or there any particular stanza that we can conclude?
Yes, it can. Usually they give popular stanzas.
Okay, so by reading it, we can find out which one is popular or not.
You have to be acquainted with that. You see,
Okay.
annotation is a bit problem, obviously, for everybody. When it comes, it is very difficult to identify from where it has come and how to answer. So you have to do that. There is no other way.
Sir.
Okay.
Sir,
yes.
Sir, for tomorrow's class, what we have to do, sir? This book will continue or next book?
No. Book 3.
Am I audible,
tomorrow. Yes, audible. Tomorrow we shall discuss metaphysical poets.
In which book, sir? This book only, sir?
No. Metaphysical poets.
Hello.
Metaphysical poets.
Hello, sir.
Yes.
Am I audible?
Yes.
Sir, we will attend 70 marks in our theory exam or 100 marks?
Theory exam 100 marks.
100 marks. And out of 100, that counted 70% only.
Yes.
Hello?
It will be 100 marks, but 70% will be
out of 100, that 70% only counted in our. How should we prepare our answer, sir, in the final exam? How should we prepare our answer paper?
Think about historical background, then biography of the poet, then about the poem. The pattern I told you
in the first page, sir. In the first page, we'll write the synopsis and the definition like that.
Yes.
Meaning, yes. Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
Okay, learners. Then goodbye for today. Tomorrow we shall meet once again, and goodbye then. Tomorrow we shall discuss metaphysical poetry.
Okay, sir.
Okay,
Thank
goodbye.
you, sir.
Have a good day.
Goodbye.
Good day.
Good day, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.